The winter wind howled across the manicured lawns of Windsor, but inside the private apartments the air was colder still. For months the royal household had lived under a carefully maintained silence, polite smile for the cameras, measured statements to the press, and an unspoken agreement that certain fractures must never be allowed to show. That silence shattered the morning the private memorandum arrived on Camilla's desk. It was unsigned, no crest, no formal seal, just a single sheet of heavy cream paper, delivered by a senior member of the household staff who would not meet her eyes. The wording was precise, almost clinical. Effective immediately, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales requested that the Queen Consort refrain from entering any royal residence under the direct stewardship of the Wales household. Kensington Palace, Adelaide Cottage, Anmer Hall, even the private wings of Windsor Castle when the Prince and Princess of Wales were in residence. The ban was quiet, absolute, and devastating. Camilla read the note twice. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. For a woman who had survived decades of public scorn, whispered campaigns, and a long, grinding wait for recognition, this was different. This was personal. This was final. She set the paper down, walked to the window overlooking the east terrace, and stood there for a long time without moving. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and controlled, the kind of calm that precedes a storm. "She has drawn a line," Camilla said to the empty room, "and she has drawn it through the heart of this family." The roots of the rupture ran deeper than any single memorandum. Those who had watched the household closely knew the tension had been building for years, ever since Catherine had returned from her extended recovery and begun to reshape the rhythm of royal life with quiet, relentless precision. Where Camilla preferred the older, more formal cadence of palace tradition, Catherine moved with a modern clarity that left little room for ambiguity. Staff who had once reported to both women now found themselves navigating competing expectations. Invitations were timed carefully. Seating charts were scrutinized. Even the allocation of private apartments at Windsor became a matter of delicate negotiation. It was a children's security that finally tipped the balance. After a series of discreet security reviews, Catherine had insisted on tighter protocols around Kensington Palace and Adelaide Cottage. The new arrangements restricted access to a smaller circle of trusted aides and family members. Camilla's name was not on the revised list. When the Queen Consort's office inquired, the reply was polite, formal, and unyielding. The Princess of Wales believed the current arrangements were necessary for the children's well-being. No further discussion was invited. Camilla felt the exclusion like a physical blow. She had spent years cultivating a careful relationship with the younger generation, attending school events when invited, sending thoughtful gifts, maintaining the public image of a united family. Now the doors were closing one by one. The private wings of Windsor, once open to her for quiet weekends, became off-limits whenever the Waleses were present. Anmer Hall, the Norfolk retreat that had once hosted joint family gatherings, was declared a family-only space. Even the gardens of Kensington, where Camilla had occasionally walked with her own grandchildren, were now subject to new access rules that effectively barred her. The Queen Consort's closest confidants watched the change with growing alarm. One longtime aide later described the moment Camilla received the memorandum as a point at which something inside her finally gave way. "She has always been resilient," the aide said. "She endured the years of being the other woman, the years of public hatred, the long wait for the title. But this, being quietly erased from the places that defined the monarchy, this was different. This was her breaking point." That evening Camilla cancelled her remaining engagements. She remained in her private sitting room at Clarence's house, the curtains drawn, the television silent. The king, who had been in Scotland for a series of engagements, was informed by secure telephone. Those who overheard the conversation described his tone as measured but deeply concerned. Camilla's replies were short. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts as she understood them. The Princess of Wales had issued a private ban. The household had implemented it without consultation, and the Queen Consort would not pretend the slight was insignificant. By the following morning, the atmosphere inside the wider royal household had shifted. Senior courtiers moved carefully between offices. Private secretaries exchanged brief, careful messages. The official line remained that all was well, that the family continued to work together in the usual way. But inside the private corridors, the truth were harder to disguise. Catherine's staff maintained a calm professionalism, insisting the new arrangements were about security and the children's routines rather than any personal conflict. Camilla's circle saw something else entirely, a deliberate redrawing of boundaries that left the Queen Consort on the outside. The public, of course, knew nothing. The cameras still captured the carefully choreographed appearances. The King and Queen Consort attended a joint engagement in London that same week, smiling for the press, exchanging the expected courtesies. Catherine remained at home with the children, citing a prior commitment. The photographs told one story. The private reality told another. Camilla's breaking point arrived not in a single dramatic outburst, but in a series of quiet, irreversible decisions. She instructed her private secretary to decline any future invitations that required her presence inside the restricted residences. She asked for a full review of her own household arrangements, seeking greater independence from the shared structures that had once bound the family together. And she began to speak, in the most carefully chosen private conversations, of the need to protect her own dignity after years of compromise. Those who had known Camilla longest recognized the shift. The woman who had once absorbed every slight with a practiced smile was no longer willing to absorb this one. The ban had been quiet. The response would not remain so forever. In the days that followed, the memorandum continued to circulate among a small group of senior aides. Some believed Catherine had acted out of genuine concern for her children's safety and routine. Others saw a colder calculation, an assertion of authority by a Princess of Wales who had grown more confident, more determined, and less willing to share the center of the royal stage. Whatever the intention, the effect was the same. A line had been drawn through the heart of the monarchy's private life. Camilla stood once more at the window of her sitting room as dusk settled over London. The city lights flickered beyond the trees. Somewhere across the capital, inside the private apartments of Kensington Palace, the Princess of Wales continued her own carefully ordered evening with her children. The two women occupied the same institution, the same public stage, the same carefully maintained fiction of unity. Yet the distance between them had never been greater. The Queen Consort turned from the window at last. Her expression was calm, almost serene. But those who saw her in that moment later said they recognized the look. It was the expression of a woman who had reached the end of a capacity to endure in silence. The ban had been issued quietly. The consequences would not remain quiet for long. The fracture had begun, and in the private rooms of the royal household, everyone who mattered already knew it. The days that followed the memorandum were marked by a silence more dangerous than any public quarrel. Inside Clarence's house, the atmosphere grew heavier by the hour. Camilla's private staff noticed the change immediately. Meals were left untouched. Correspondence at once received prompt attention sat unanswered. The Queen Consort spent long hours alone, the heavy curtains drawn against the weak winter light, her mind turning over every slight, every carefully worded exclusion, every closed door. She had not expected gratitude. She had never demanded affection. But she had believed, after decades of endurance, that the institution itself would protect the dignity of the consort. That belief now lay in pieces on the cream paper that still rested on her desk. The king returned from Scotland 2 days later. Their private conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Those who waited outside the study reported only that voices remained low, controlled, and unbroken by raised tones. When the king emerged, his expression was unreadable. Camilla remained seated by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale but composed. She had made her position clear. She would not beg for access. She would not negotiate her presence in residences that had once been open to her by right of marriage and service. If the Princess of Wales wished to redraw the boundaries of the family, then those boundaries would stand, and Camilla would stand outside them. Catherine, for her part, maintained an outward calm that her closest aide described as almost clinical. The security protocols around Kensington Palace and Adelaide Cottage were tightened further. New lists of approved visitors circulated among the Wales household staff. Camilla's name did not appear. When questions were raised discreetly by senior courtiers, the reply was consistent. The arrangement served the children's stability and the family's privacy. No personal animosity was acknowledged. No olive branch was offered. Yet the private reality was more complex. Those who moved between the two households began to notice small, telling details. Invitations that had once been joint were now carefully separated. Joint photographs that had once been encouraged were quietly discouraged. Even the language used in internal briefings shifted. Where once the household had spoken of the family, it now spoke of the Waleses and the King and Queen Consort as distinct entities whose powers must be managed with increasing care. Camilla's breaking point, when it fully arrived, did not come in a single explosive moment. It arrived in the accumulated weight of exclusion. One evening she requested a private meeting with her senior private secretary and two of her longest-serving ladies-in-waiting. The conversation that followed was quiet, precise, and final. She instructed them to prepare a revised schedule of engagements that would minimize any reliance on shared royal residences. She asked for a review of her own security arrangements, seeking greater independence. And she made clear that she would no longer accept the polite fiction that the ban was merely administrative. "I have given this family everything," she said, her voice steady. "I have absorbed the public hatred. I have waited in the shadows. I have smiled when it cost me. I will not now be erased from the places that define the crown because it is convenient for someone else." The words hung in the air. Those present later described the moment as a true fracture, the point at which the Queen Consort stopped absorbing and began to resist. Word of the private meeting traveled, as such things always do, through the narrow corridors of the household. Senior figures at Buckingham Palace grew uneasy. The king, caught between the woman he had waited a lifetime to marry and the daughter-in-law who represented the future of the monarchy, found himself in an impossible position. Public unity remained the absolute priority. Private reconciliation seemed increasingly remote. Catherine continued her carefully ordered life with the children. School runs, private lessons, quiet evenings at Adelaide Cottage. She received reports of Camilla's growing withdrawal with the same measured calm she applied to most matters of household management. If she felt any regret, she did not show it. Her focus remained on the small world she had built around her family, a world now deliberately sealed against the older generation's influence. The wider staff began to feel the strain. Aides who had once moved freely between Clarence House and Kensington Palace now found their movements scrutinized. Conversations that had once been open became guarded. Even the traditional Christmas arrangements, still months away, became the subject of careful, anxious discussion. Would the Queen Consort be present at Sandringham? Would the usual family photographs include her? Would the public see the carefully maintained image of unity, or would the fracture begin to show? Camilla herself offered no public comment. She attended the engagements that remained on her schedule with the same polished composure the world had come to expect. She smiled for the cameras. She exchanged the expected courtesies with those who crossed her path. But those who knew her best saw the change in her eyes. The resilience that had carried her through decades of hostility had hardened into something colder, more determined. One senior courtier, speaking privately to a trusted colleague, put it most clearly: she has reached a point where silence is no longer enough. The band was quiet. The response will not stay quiet forever. Something will give. In the private apartment of Clarence House, Camilla stood once more at the window as evening fell. The city beyond the trees was bright with lights. Somewhere across London, inside the sealed world of Kensington Palace, the Princess of Wales continued her own carefully protected evening. The two women remained bound by the same institution, the same public stage, the same unyielding demand for appearance. Yet the distance between them had become a chasm. Camilla turned from the window at last. Her decision was made. She would not force her way back into residences that had been closed against her. She would not plead for inclusion. Instead, she would protect her own dignity with the same quiet steel that Catherine had used to exclude her. The ban had been issued without consultation. The consequences would unfold without apology. In the days that followed, the household braced itself. Private secretaries prepared contingency plans. Senior aides monitored the press for any sign that the fracture might become public. The king continued his official duties with a measured calm expected of the sovereign, while privately attempting to hold the pieces of his family together. But the line had already been drawn. Catherine had drawn it with quiet precision. Camilla had recognized it for what it was, a deliberate separation of the old from the new, the past from the future. The Queen Consort would not cross that line again. She would stand on her own side of it, unbroken, unyielding, and finally finish with silent endurance. The fracture that had begun with a single unsigned memorandum now ran through the heart of the monarchy itself. And though the public still saw only the carefully maintained image of unity, those inside the private rooms of the royal household already knew the truth. The The breaking point had been reached. There would be no quiet return.